Okay, welcome back. I started up a brand new scene here. I got rid of everything that I had in my scene so we can start over from scratch. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to go ahead and edit objects and start getting into some fundamentals of polygon modeling. Okay, so what are polygons? How does all that stuff work? Well, let's go ahead and get into that now, and you'll start to see as we go how all that stuff works and what all this stuff means. Okay? So let's go ahead and create a simple box to get started with. I'm going to click on box over here in the create panel. Make sure you're using standard primitives. And I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag here to create a simple box. And if you hold down the control key while you're creating this, you can see how you can alter the way that this object is created. So right now it's being created pretty uniformly. Okay, so there's my box that I'm going to use as a little guinea pig and test around with. I'm going to right click the right mouse button. I'm going to right click the mouse to go ahead and end that creation process with this cube right here, with this box. Okay, so now let's go over to the modify panel. So click on modify panel over here, and we have a simple box. Now we can't do much of a box. We have to convert this box into a different type of geometric object that we can then edit and modify. So what am I talking about? Well, it's pretty simple. The box we can't really do much with. So let's convert the box into either a mesh or a polygon object. And then we can edit and modify it to our heart's content. At that point, you can create this into a car, a person, a character, a monster, or even a level for a video game. Okay? So how do we convert this? Well, there's a few ways that we can convert this object to a polygon object or to an editable mesh, because there's two types of objects that we can go ahead and modify this as an editable mesh or as an editable poly. We'll start off with editable mesh, and then we'll see the differences between the two. Okay, one way that we can convert this is by going up here to where it says box in the modifier list. Right click and you get a sub menu. Down here you'll get a conversion menu. So 3D Max wants to know, what do we want to convert this to? We can convert it to an editable mesh, an editable patch, an editable poly, or into a NURBS object. We're interested in converting this to an editable mesh. So click on editable mesh, and you notice that now all of the options here in the modify panel have completely changed. We have a lot more options. If you click here in empty space here of the menu bar and click and drag, you can then use your mouse wheel to go ahead and scroll down or up. Or you can use this little scrolling bar here on the right, this little thin one, the gray one. Click and drag that up and down to move across here. So we have different rollouts. Each one of these little selections here, like where it says selection, where it says soft selection, edit geometry, those are called rollouts. And if you click on them once, you can collapse them to tuck them out of the way. If you click on it again, you can expand it so you have access to whatever's inside of that rollout. Okay, so it's just a way of organizing things to make it simpler and easier to work with the command panel. Okay, so here we have selection. This editable mesh is made out of a few key components. It's made out of basically vertices, edges, and faces. Okay, but we also have access to polygons and elements. So what's the difference between all these different things? Well, let's first see how we can access these things. We can access them from this menu. So we can click on vertex, and now you can see, if we zoom in here, there's these blue dots that appear wherever these white lines meet. And these white lines are the edges of the object. And every edge is going to meet up at some point called a vertex. And that's what these little blue dots are. Right now we're in vertex mode, and we can edit these vertices. So how do we edit them? Well, it's pretty simple. You can click to select the vertex, and it'll be highlighted in red. You can then hit W to activate the select and move tool, and we can actually move this vertex around, as you can see, thus modifying and editing this object. So we can change the shape of the object to make it look like anything we want. A truck, a tire, a cup, a person's head, anything we want. Okay? Then we have edge mode. If we click on edge mode, now you see the vertices are gone. But we can now edit the edges. So if we click on any one of these white edges, they'll be highlighted in red. And again, if we activate the select and move tool, now we can move these edges around and edit this object even more, as you can see. Then we have face mode. We can select face mode and it won't look like anything happened. Faces in 3ds Max are the triangles that make up the polygons. Every one of the walls, the blue walls of this cube object, is a polygon, and every polygon is made up of faces, also known as triangles in the 3D industry. Okay, so if we click here, there's one of the hidden triangles. Here's another hidden triangle. So they're hidden from view by default. How can we see the triangles? Right click on top of the object to open up a quad menu, and we'll talk more about quad menus in a bit. Go down to Object Properties and click on that in order to open up the Object Properties options window here. What we want to do is turn edges only off, so uncheck that. Then click on OK. Now we can see the triangles that were hidden before that make up this cube object. So here's all the triangles, and they'll be shown with these dotted lines. Okay, so we can select these different triangles and we can move them. We can also rotate these triangles, and we can even scale them down, as you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, and now I'm going to go back to Object Properties, and I'm going to turn edges only on to go ahead and hide those triangles again the way it was by default. Now we'll go over here to the right and we have Polygon mode. If we click on that, we can now select the polygons that make up this object. Now polygon can be made up of many triangles. So polygon can be 4 sides, it can be 5 sides, it can be as many sides really as you want. But it can't be below 3 sides. A triangle cannot be less than 3 sides, obviously, or else it wouldn't be a triangle. So polygons are made up of triangles. Okay? And the way that we can create objects in 3ds Max or any 3D animation software that allows you to model is by editing these polygons. And we'll see more about that in a bit. Then we have element mode. Element mode basically in this case is going to select the entire object. Why is it doing that? Well, that's because this object is one continuous object. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go to polygon mode. I'm going to select this polygon here. I'm going to go ahead and right click here. And I'm going to click on detach. I'm going to click on detach to element. And don't really worry about what I'm doing here. I'm kind of just moving ahead. Just don't worry about that. It's not important right now. I'm going to detach this polygon from the object. Now, this object is still one object. Okay? This object is one object. As you can see, when I select it and I move it, it's all one object, even though this polygon was detached. If I go to element mode, okay, by clicking here on element, I can select this as one element and this is another element. Why is this an element? Because it's not physically attached or welded to the rest of the object. That's because the vertices here are detached. So even though it's the same object, it's a different element of that object. So there you go. So think about it this way. Imagine your sneakers. The shoe itself is one element. The shoelaces, although are part of the sneakers, are a different element because they're not physically part of the shoe. You can take the shoelaces off and put them on another shoe, for example. So that's kind of the way that elements work in 3ds Max. Okay, so those are the different components for these objects. Let me close that. Alright, so if we scroll down here through this menu, we have an edit geometry rollout down here where we can edit this object and start to edit it and make changes to it. For example, I can select this polygon up here on the top. This one right here. I'll go to polygon mode. I'll select this object on this polygon on the top. It's highlighted in red. I can then click on extrude, and then you notice this icon pops up on top of the polygon I have selected whenever I put my mouse cursor over it. That's the extrude icon. If I left click and drag, I can extrude that polygon up and make a new set of polygons. Basically what I did, I made an addition to this polygon object. I can create all kinds of things and I can edit this in all kinds of different ways. I can, for example, select this polygon here on the side, click on divide, and I can go ahead and divide this polygon. As you can see, it cut it up right there and made new triangles. So now this thing is made up of a whole bunch of different triangles here on that one polygon, where that one polygon used to be. Okay, so you can edit geometry using this rollout. Down here we have more properties and more things, but we're not going to get into that right now at the moment. I just want to show you real quick how to create an object, how to convert it to an editable mesh, and how to start editing that specific object. Okay? Alright. Now, there's another type of object called an editable poly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to go ahead and convert this. So in the quad menu that I get, I'm going to go to convert to, and I'm going to go to convert to editable poly. And this is another way that you can convert objects. Instead of going here and right clicking on the actual object in the modifier list and then going to convert to editable poly or convert to editable mesh, I can do it simply by right clicking and then using my quad menu. These are called quad menus, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay? Now, the editable poly, if I expand this by clicking on the plus icon, I can see I have vertices, I've got edges, I've got something new called borders, I have polygons, and I have elements. So instead of having faces, I now have borders. I don't have access to the individual little triangles that make up the polygons when I'm in edit poly mode. But I do have access to the polygons, and I can continue to extrude these polygons like I was doing before with the editable mesh. Okay? Now, what are borders? Borders are basically the edges that border an open polygon. So for example, I don't have borders in this area up here. That's because there's no holes. All the polygons are welded together and joined together at the edges and at their vertices, so there's no open holes. However, this polygon that's out here in the open, this one right here, is not attached to the rest of the object. So it's going to have borders. So if I go to border mode and I click on this edge, it's going to select all the edges that make up the border of that object. Same thing if I click on this open edge over here, it'll select that entire border right there, immediately showing me that there's an open hole right there. And in case I have to select that border for whatever reason, there you go. I can select it very easily, instead of having to come in here and select all of these different edges one by one. Okay, so let's talk about these different components and things. Let me go to vertex mode by clicking here on vertex, and what I can do is I can select a vertex here. I can hold down control to select another vertex here. I can hold down control and select another vertex there and another there, and then I can move them. So you can select multiple vertices or multiple components, and you can then move those components around together. Okay, now the fastest way to work here is using shortcuts. Shortcuts are the name of the game. You want to learn shortcuts as soon as possible, and you want to learn as many as possible early on. That way you can work more efficiently and faster. So the shortcut for vertex mode is 1 on the keyboard, 2 will take you to edge mode, 3 will take you to border mode, 4 will take you to polygon mode, and 5 will take you to element mode. Okay, so those are the different shortcuts there for those different components. Those are components that make up the polygonal object here that we have in 3ds Max. Okay, let's talk about selection methods here. I'm going to go to polygon mode by hitting 4 on the keyboard. So now I'm in polygon mode. I can select polygons, as you can see. I'm going to select my selection method to show you a few different ways of selecting objects in 3ds Max. Right now we're at the default selection method up here, which is the rectangular selection method, which allows you to draw a rectangle and select any object. Now in this mode, what's going to happen is any object that gets touched by this square selection or this rectangle selection is going to be automatically selected, even objects that are behind your view. If you want to change that, you can pretty easily. Just go over here to where it says ignore back facing and check that on. Now if I go ahead and select components on this side, when I turn around, components that were out of my view are not selected. That's what back facing means. So by ignoring back facing, we're ignoring all those faces that are in the back, hence why it's called back facing. Okay, let's deselect by clicking once in empty space. What's another way of selecting objects or components in 3ds Max? Well, let's left click here in this menu, hold down the left mouse button so that the menu pops up, and let's select this little circle icon. That's the circular selection method. What I can do is just draw a circle simply by clicking and dragging, and anything that touches that circle is automatically selected, as you can see. So I can just draw these circles and select different objects. Let's switch over to another one. Fence selection. Fence selection allows you to click once, then click again, then click again, and again, and again, and then double click to end the selection, and anything that falls inside that fence selection becomes selected. So you can come in here and basically draw out an area where you want 3ds Max to select components. Let's move on to the next one, the lasso selection. Lasso selection is pretty interesting because it allows you to interactively draw a selection. So I can click and drag and then draw out any shape that I want, circles, or I can draw an outline of certain areas that I want. And when I let go, 3ds Max will select anything that was inside of that lasso and anything that the lasso touched. Then we have the paint selection method. Paint selection method is very interesting because what you do is you left click and drag, and anything that the mouse touches while you're left clicking and dragging, anything that falls inside that little radius, that little circle you see right there, is going to become selected by 3ds Max. So it's kind of like painting a selection. You're just kind of painting away what you want selected. Okay, so those are the different selection methods in 3ds Max. Let me go back to rectangular selection, and I'm going to show you how to use window crossing. What's window crossing? Right now we have window crossing is located up here. It's deactivated at the moment. So basically what that means is that anything that touches this selection square or selection rectangle that I'm drawing out is going to be selected. Now if I activate window crossing, now you're going to notice something different happens. Whenever my rectangular selection here touches an object, it will not select it. So what's happening? Well, the way that this works is pretty simple. In order to be able to select a component, the component has to completely fall inside the selection box. So this polygon that's right here, for example, I just selected, I can't select it if I draw a box on one of its corners, or if I draw a box that takes up half of it, it won't become selected. The only way to select it is to draw a box or a rectangle that encompasses the whole thing. See? So if I draw a rectangle here and the entire polygon or vertex or edge, if it falls inside of that rectangle completely, it'll become selected, as you can see. So let's turn window crossing off. Now let's talk about the quad menus. Quad menus are extremely important in 3ds Max because they allow you to do work much faster. What's a quad menu? If you right click in 3D Studio Max, you get yourself a quad menu. Now the quad menu has different quadrants. For example, up here we have the display quadrant. To the lower right we have the transform quadrant. Over here we have a tools 2 and a tools 1 quadrant. And basically what these do is give you quick access, little shortcut access to tools that you would find in other places. Tools that you would find here under these different main menu items. Tools that you would find here in the command panel over here. So instead of scrolling through this and looking for these different tools, you can use a quad menu simply by right clicking anywhere in the viewport in 3ds Max, and you can select different things. For example, instead of coming over here and selecting vertex mode or edge mode or whatnot, you can use the quad menu to go ahead and select it here. So here's polygon mode. There we go. Right click, go to maybe vertex mode. Right click and go to top level mode, for example, so you get out of vertex mode. You can also use the create tool right here. You can activate the move tool, the rotate scale tool. You can use the select tool from here. You can clone objects from here. You can access the object's properties from here. You can also freeze items and unhide items, just like what we were doing earlier in the other video where we were looking at the display panel up here of the main command panel. So instead of going and digging through all these panels and menus, you can just use a right quad menu and get the work done about 10 times as fast. So the quad menus are extremely important for speed and efficiency. Now we get different quad menus. If we right click the mouse, we'll get one quad menu. If we hold down shift and right click, we'll get a different quad menu. This is the snap quad menu. You get that by holding down shift and right mouse clicking. And from here you can activate different things like the snapping options. You can choose to snap to vertices or to grid points or to faces or edges and so on and so forth. You can even click on grid and snap settings and it'll open up the options and the settings for snaps and for your grids. Normally you would activate that by coming up here and doing it from here. So you right click on top of the snaps button up here in the main toolbar, and there's the grid and snap settings. It's just a faster way of activating and accessing things. So you can use different keys to activate different quad menus. If we hold down Alt and use the right mouse button, we can activate a different quad menu that gives us access to different tools, as you can see. If we hold down Shift and Alt and use the right mouse button, now we activate the reactor quad menu, which allows us to do dynamic simulations, things like that. If we hold down Control and Alt and use the right mouse button, we activate the lighting and rendering quad menu, which allows us to quickly access commonly used tools when rendering. For example, we have access to the environment settings, the effects settings, exposure control, and different. We even have a mental ray quad menu here for using the mental ray renderer, which we'll talk about more in another video later on in this tutorial. Okay. So those are the different quad menus. You can create your own quad menus as well and customize the quad menus. You can do that by coming up to Customize. Then you can go to Customize User Interface. And from here, a window is going to pop up. And from here, you can get different tabs. You can customize the keyboard. You can customize toolbars. You can customize quads, which are the quad menus we were talking about. And you can click here and you can see the default viewport quad. You can also see the snap quad menu, the animation quad menu, as well as you can create a couple of custom ones and so on and so forth. So 3ds Max is extremely flexible, very customizable in that regard. Okay, so this video has gone long enough. I'm going to end it here and we'll continue working with 3ds Max in the next video.